Hey everyone, this is Trent from ExtremeRigs.net, and today we're going to be showing you how to put a Waterblock onto a graphics card. For this example, we'll be using the GTX 980 alongside a EK Waterblock with a backplate. So the first step is of course to remove the air cooler. Now this we've already done. The card we're using is an EVGA SuperClock card which has the ACX cooler on it. And to remove that, all you have to do is take a Phillips head screwdriver, otherwise known as a crosshead, and remove all these screws. And you'll see there's this metal faceplate that's separate from the cooler. So your exact graphics card may differ from that. And the most important thing, of course, is to make sure that your graphics card is compatible with your Waterblock. And EK have an excellent site called Cooling Configurator, which lets you check your part number versus their Waterblocks, and it shows you whether it's compatible or not. So that's a really nice feature if you haven't done this before. You will notice something a little different about this graphics card, which is this wire coming over here. This is a temperature probe that I've added on. For the purpose of this, you can completely ignore that. So, assuming you've already taken off your reference cooler, we're going to go ahead and open up the EK packaging here. This bigger box right here is the actual Waterblock itself. It slides right off. And in the top layer here are the accessories you get. A little accessory pack with screws, stop fittings, some Allen keys, and some thermal interface material. You also get some thermal pads and some instructions. EK always gives you some very thorough instructions. And you can see, it talks about, no, it doesn't talk about that. I was going to say it talks about removing the graphics card, air cooler. It does tell you where the screws are. It doesn't show a picture of it, but that's fine. We are going to ignore this because we're going to pretend we know what we're doing, because we've done this a million times. So let's get out the actual Waterblock. Alright, here she is. Get this packaging out the way. So we can go ahead and open this up. And one thing I would recommend, if you get a nickel plexi block like this, in other words, if it has a clear window on the front, I would suggest buying the accessory that gives you a clear bridge here. It costs a little bit more, but it gives you a clean look. And we're gonna go through replacing that. We have one of those clear blocks here. We're going to open that up first. And you're going to see you have some O-rings here. These are pretty critical that just seem to get stuck to the block. That's okay. So this is the replacement bridge. So we're going to go ahead and remove it. You'll notice that there was also an Allen key that came with the replacement bridge. We're just going to unscrew these 3 screws here. So now that we've done that, we can put that back down. We need to make sure our O-rings are put in. See, there's a bit of funk on these. Not too sure what it is, and I don't think it really matters. So you can see the O-ring goes in quite nicely. Hopefully yours in the package will be stuck in place for you, unlike these. So you can see they're, quite nicely in there. If you have problems, you can get something like silicone grease or something to kind of help it go in there. So we're going to lift this back up, and you'll see there's two edges on here. There's a chamfered edge that's a 45-degree bevel on one side, and the other side is square. You want the chamfered bevel towards the front of the card. Although I don't think it matters if you put it the other way around. It just means that way your logo is the right way up. So we're going to put that on there, and we're going to take the screws that we just had in this guy. We're going to put that in there, and we're going to line it up. We're going to take number 1, and we're going to tighten that down most of the way, but not so it's tight. We'll take the other 2 screws, put them in. Again, we're going to screw them in most of the way, but we're not going to tighten them until we've got all 3 in. I'm going to give it a little wiggle, make sure it's nicely centered, and we're going to tighten it down. Before you really tighten it down, you probably want to check visually that the O-rings are still in place, and you can do that various ways. Obviously this is a clear bridge, so you can kind of see the O-rings in there, and then you can look from the side and make sure that the 2 plastic pieces are kind of mating together properly. And you can do that on both sides there. So we see that it's properly on there. And the next thing to do is add some stop fittings, because we're only going to be using the back ports. Of course, you will need to put stop fittings wherever you need them, and we can't really tell you what the best way to do that is. I'm just going to empty this little baggie here and try and scoop up the washers that fell all around. So we put the stop fitting on there, and the other one. I'm just going to take our tool that's provided with the block and just tighten them down. They don't have to be crazy tight. Alright, so the bridge is on. We're going to leave the fittings for later. The next thing we want to do is to clean the GPU core. The thermal interface material, there will be some residue, so we're going to take some paper towel. We're going to tear off a little piece here, and we're going to take some alcohol, rubbing alcohol. You kind of want to use at least 70%. This 99% is just a little bit more expensive, and I prefer it. So you're going to put some on your paper towel here. You're just going to wipe that off to the side. You can see it's coming up quite nicely. You can also do this with a Q-tip if you prefer. There's a whole bunch of ways to do this. And you'll see there's little bits around the edge there, which I'm just going to get off. You don't have to be terribly precise with any thermal interface material that runs off to the sides, because the thermal interface material is non-conductive. So if it's in this kind of valley here, it really doesn't matter. The important thing is to get this top surface nice and clean. So that looks pretty good. Now, typically you would use the supplied thermal interface material. This is called EK-TIM Ectotherm, and this is just rebranded Arctic Cooling. We're actually going to use our own batch of Arctic Cooling TIM because we are using this to test water blocks and we need to be consistent. But the principle is the same. You're going to take off the lid and you're going to apply a pattern, and this is the pattern that EK recommends, which is a crush shape. So you're going to wait till the tip starts to come out. And you're going to do a thin bead in an X, thin bead the other way, until it kind of looks like a British flag. Again, you don't have to be exact. You get pretty good results no matter what. So that's our TIM on there. Really, we should have done this next part before we did that, but that's okay. So we want to get out the thermal pads, and you'll see there's a bunch of different types here. And now is the point where you can consult your instructions to see which types go where. So you'll see the thin thermal pads here in this case are for the memory, and you need to cut those up, I expect. No, I can see they're actually pre-cut, which is nice. And then there's a big thermal pad that's thin for the VRMs and a thicker thermal pad for the memory IC. And then these are labeled 1, 2, and 3, and you're going to see on the diagram that they're also labeled 1, 2, and 3 as to where to put them. So we're going to start off with the memory. These guys are right here, because that's always the easiest. You're going to peel off the plastic or the paper, whichever comes off easier. Here we can see the plastic came off a bit easier. And you're going to plop it down onto the top of the memory chip. And you take the next one, and you do the same. And so on and so forth. It is worth bearing in mind, you really want to have clean hands while you do this. So do make sure you wash your hands before you start. And I suppose afterwards too, you probably don't want to eat some of these chemicals. Oops. The placement doesn't have to be exact. You just want to cover, 90% of the chip. Obviously, the more the better. And the other thing to bear in mind is that, if you're not careful, these thermal pads will fold up on themselves. And that's a bad thing, because then if it bunches up, it's going to be thicker. And that can be a problem. So you can see we've done 8 memory chips here, which is all that's required for the memory. And so we will now do the VRM section. So according to the instructions, these chips here we're going to cover, and those chips too. And you can see there's some missing VRMs here. We have a 4+1 setup, and there are 2 that are missing, and those are the ones that get the thick thermal pad. So we're going to take our thermal pad, and we're going to take some scissors, and we're going to cut it down to size. And according to the diagram, the thermal pad goes all the way up to these holes. So this is kind of hard to do with the camera here. We're going to take a little shot, see if that's right. Yep, that's about right. So just going to cut that there. And then we're going to nip it here. I'm going to see if that works. So there we go. Almost a bit too close. Shave a little bit off there. So that's one piece we're going to do. We're going to peel off again. You got to make sure you peel off both sides of the thermal pad. You see there's a clear side. This is the one sometimes people miss. And if you miss it, your temperatures are not going to be very good. And then we're going to peel it off the other side. And you know, these bigger pieces are just a little harder to get in place. Just take your time, be careful, and there we go. You're gonna see my thermal probe is just kind of sticking up there. Hopefully that's not a problem. So we're gonna take the leftovers of this and we're gonna make another piece. See which ones. This one looks a bit better. Again, peel both sides of your thermal pad. This 980 has some of the biggest thermal pads that I've seen. So then we're just going to take this last piece, and it looks like this does not need to be cut down to size. So again, peel both sides off this thicker pad. And we're just going to put that in there. See actually that this one isn't quite covering everything we want it to. So I'm just going to lay it down again, get a little bit closer. Okay, so our thermal pads are done. Our TIM is on, so now we get to place the block. As we were about to install the block, and at that point my camera battery died. So we've had to go back in time a little bit and take the block off, and we're going to reshoot. So you'll notice some of the thermal pads have miraculously transferred to the block itself. We've cleaned up the old TIM. This TIM spread was very good, by the way. And we put some new TIM on, and we're gonna remount the block for you. What we also did was to open the backplate package. Inside there is the backplate itself. This is the nickel plated version. EK now, instead of just doing black, they have a range of different colors, including just kind of silvery nickel here. And that also comes with some thermal interface pads and some screws of its own. It also has instructions. And the reason why we do this is because if you just buy the block and follow the instructions for the block, it won't assume that you have a backplate. In other words, the backplate instructions override what the block instructions tell you to do. So we're going to go ahead and mount this block. In this particular block's case, you'll see there's a little window here, and that lines up with this capacitor. It's actually easier to do this the other way around. We're going to show you the hard way. You're going to try and line this up and put it on there, and then you're going to flip it over. And then you'll look at the back here, and you can kind of see the screw threads of the block underneath. And you can wiggle it around a bit to line it up perfectly. You're then going to take your screws, and bear in mind, a lot of blocks have a variety of different screws, and this EK one is no different. So you want to read the instructions, and EK tell you exactly which screw is for the block. This one is not going in because I don't think I'm lined up properly. There we go. You can see it just kind of fell in right there. You never want to force the screws. You just want to be very gentle, and that way you won't strip any threads. So you're going to put one in at a time, and you're not going to tighten them down just yet. You're just going to put them in to hold the two together, and once all four are in, we'll start tightening it down. So these particular screws, they're listed as M4 with a little x, sorry, M2.5 X4. So M means they're metric screws. 2.5 is the diameter of the thread, and 4 is the length of the thread. So if you're confused about which screws are which, the instructions will tell you what the screw is, and you can measure it with a ruler. So you can see we're just going back and forth in a kind of diagonal pattern and just tightening these up a little. Once we get close, we're going to screw it down harder. Before we do that, we're going to make sure that we have all the other screws that we need to do. So if we look at our instructions, it says you should have these 4 for the core, as well as this one, it seems. Oh, this is handy. The instructions say screws with marked red arrow need to be removed and replaced. Well, that's great because we can't see which ones are which. The easiest way to tell, of course, is just to look at your backplate, and that will tell you which ones. You can see there's holes, 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 and these other ones don't get holes except for this one and that one. So we can tell which ones we need to put in. So we're going to go ahead and put those in. And to do that, we need to find out which ones are which. So we are going to assume it's the same type, because there's no reason it wouldn't be the same type as the core for these. You don't want them sticking out of the backplate. So this guy's going to get one. And leave these ones over here, just in case. Let's take that and make sure these screw properly in. That one does not seem to want to go in. Is the hole not lined up? It's not quite perfect there. So that's always a lesson, which is to make sure you may want to loosen these up just so you can slide the block around a bit more to get there we go. Okay, now let's try that one again. We're just going to go and tighten all these down now that the block is well aligned. Once you're done, again, don't do these too hard. You can check along the line of the block and just make sure that it's not warped in any way. You haven't over tightened something. So we put those screws in. Now we're going to double check at 1, 2, 3, 4. So those are the extra screws we did. So now we can start prepping the back plate. The back plate, of course, needs thermal pads. Let's move these screws out of the way there. Move these old thermal pads out of the way so we can do this. So we have 2 thermal pads and they are both the same thickness. So we're going to install one here. We're going to use the leftovers over here. So just need to snip a little bit off this. Looks about right. She goes. Sometimes these long pieces tend to stretch a little bit, so you may have to trim off more than you think. And then for this guy, we just need two strips. So these aren't directly cooling chips on the board. What they're doing is cooling the circuit board underneath those chips. And that then cools those chips a little. So let's see if we can get this in there. Same with this guy. Yeah, he's going to need a little trim there. Okay, good enough. Let's take the excess off there. So now we can take the back plate, flip it over, line it up. And you may need to remove this SLI cover just to get it right. So, now that we've done that, check our instructions again, and as expected, you fit the screws. So we're going to start off with these chrome ones for this side, and then we'll do the other side. Again, you're just gonna have these a little loose. And then you'll tighten them in a bit, because you need to make sure everything's lined up. I've done that. Let's do the front section. As you'll see, this block doesn't go all the way to the end, so we've got some guys to deal with right here. So, on these ones we have the silver ones go through and then you put a nut on the top, but we also have, normally you screw through that one too, but it seems you don't anymore. On the old versions you did. So you're gonna put this through like so. You're gonna put a washer on there, and then you're gonna put a nut. And you're gonna do that again. And we're going to go around and make sure all of those are tight. Okay, so here we have it, the finished mounted block. and the finished mounted backplate. Remember to install your fittings, and remember to thoroughly leak test. These blocks do get leak tested on their own, but of course the rest of your loop might be leaking because you didn't quite tighten something down. So that's it from us. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. As always, please subscribe to the channel, and we will keep making more videos.